huge warm welcome to you all on today's session. We'll kick off shortly in the next 30 seconds to a minute, just so if people are jumping from call to call, they can grab a cup of tea and just stick your feet up ahead of what's going to be an action-packed next hour. We've had around 200 people register, which is fantastic for a topic that is on everyone's minds at the moment. I think that's fair to say when it comes to the cost of living crisis, whether it's us as individuals ourselves, whether it's the organisations and what we can be doing. Everyone is facing challenges, and that's something that we really want to get across today, is that whilst we recognise the challenge, what can we actually do about it going forwards from a practical lens? Now, we're also coming at this from a realistic lens, that whilst it would be amazing to give absolutely everyone within our organisations pay rises, businesses are struggling as well, supply chain issues. We know that inflation is going to impact a lot of areas across organisations too. So we've put together this panel and the three experts that I really wanted to get on. So we're really fortunate that Diaries could make this happen to talk through today's topic. Now, what I would love just to begin with is just to put a quick hello and where you're joining from as well. Would love to see Sophie, hello from London. Stevie McLaren, good morning from Stirlingshire. So very wet up there. Normally it is up north. We've got Loretta joining from sunny South Yorkshire, where I am. Anne-Marie in Glasgow. Steve from Somerset. So good morning to you all. Really good to see you on today's session. One thing that I would love for today's session is to continue the chat. And the reason why we put this on is for people like you that care about financial well-being, that care about our own financial well-being and our teams as well. So the more we can get the chat going, the more we can answer your questions, answer your concerns and challenges. And the likelihood is that someone else is facing a very similar challenge across another organisation as well. So we love this to be as interactive as possible. Now, the session will be 60 minutes. That's my challenge, to be able to condense all of the brain power that we've got today into a 60-minute session. And you'll also receive the session by recording via email as well. And so you've not got to worry about scribbling down pages and pages of notes. You can make one or two notes, but would love you just to be as engaged and interacted with today's session as possible. If you have got a question and you'd like it to be anonymous, just put brackets anon and send it to me individually, or use the Q&A function as well. But the first thing that I'd love to do is just to understand more about what's the biggest challenge that your organisation is facing at the moment. Is it around communications when it comes to financial well-being? Is it around staff turnover and other organisations paying above what you're able to afford? What are the challenges that you're facing? So just 5 or 10 seconds, would love to see what those challenges are. Now, as you're typing those out, if you do enjoy today's session, we have amazing feedback, and I read every single piece of feedback that comes through to Champion. Then please refer it on to a friend, colleague, so we can spread the word and we can impact as many people as possible going forwards. Now, the reason why we put on this session today is off the back of the guide that we developed, and this was really a request from people like you. Whether it was the cost of living, whether it was financial well-being specifically, whether it was what we can do as an organisation in terms of interventions, we put together this guide to be able to support individuals and organisations build out their strategy. If you haven't downloaded the guide, Miles will put a very quick link, or Alex from Champion will put a very quick link in the chat function where you can download the guide. But what I'll do shortly is just summarise a little bit around the guide and the data that has been created off the back of the Champion platform. Now, before we dive into the data, what I'd love to do is introduce to you the three rock stars that we've got on today's session. So first of all, Gethin Nadin, Chief Innovation Officer, friend of mine, someone that I've learned so much from over the years at Benefex. Gethin, could you just provide a very quick intro to yourself and why financial wellbeing means so much to you?
Excellent. Well, thanks first of all for having me. Really glad to be here. So I'm Gethin Nadin. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Benefex, an employee experience technology business. I'm also a psychologist and author, so very interested in research, very interested in finding out what impacts well-being at work. And so I think, what I'm really interested in today is, this is a stressor that's affecting people pretty universally across the workforce. And so how do we kind of share some best practice of dealing with that stressor if we can't do what you've mentioned before, the kind of pay rises and bonuses and that kind of stuff. And so looking forward to the chat today. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Geth. The next person that I'd love to introduce, and I've only met Tari recently, but again, learned so much, and the energy and the passion that Tari has for this space, I think is just second to none. Tari, would you be able to just provide a short introduction to you, and again, why financial wellbeing is something that you care about so much?
Sure. Thank you, Harry. And thank you again for having me as well. So my name is Tari Okoye. I am the proposition manager for financial wellbeing at Morrison Wealth. And I have been managing the team that's developed this financial wellbeing proposition for the team for the past 4 years. I'm really passionate about financial wellbeing, specifically the education side, because I do think it's one area that's really not well appreciated and recognized in terms of the impact it has on individuals, families, generations, etc. So I'm really passionate about just improving that for individuals and for employees, really. And I'm excited to be part of the panel.
Thank you so much. And I can see loads of comments coming through, and we're going to touch upon those shortly. So thank you for your comments within here. And last but definitely not least is Samuel Lathy. Again, a friend of mine, learned loads in the financial wellbeing space from Sam, and doing some amazing work at an organisation called BIPIT. Sam, could you provide just a quick intro to yourself? And again, I'd love to learn a little bit more around why you care about financial wellbeing so much.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks for inviting me onto this. And yeah, it's a subject that's very close to my heart, really. Anyone who's heard me speak before will know that I've had to deal with an awful lot of financial stress myself in the past, and I've been on quite a journey with that. It resulted in me having some sort of mental health problems earlier in my life, and then I resolved that I was going to learn financial management inside and out. I started quite literally in the post room, and within 10 years I was in the boardroom looking after other people's money for them. So all the way from kind of a financial screw up, if you will, to a trusted financial expert. And now what we're doing at BIPIT is trying to provide everyone with professional expert support, no matter what their background is, no matter what their situation is, no matter what their bank balance is. Everyone should have access to professional support so that we can ultimately help people deal with stress, help them deal with anxiety, and hopefully create a fairer society where everyone's a bit more secure and a bit more prosperous.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I love to hear about are people's stories when it comes to financial wellbeing, and that's something we'll touch upon a little bit more. And I know, Gethin, Tari, you've shared your story with me previously around financial wellbeing. Everyone has a story when it comes to this place, and everyone is on a journey. So thank you to the three of you for joining today's session. So what I would love to do is just go through some of the data to begin with around why this is such an important topic, to raise the awareness, but also to shape and mold the conversation that we're going to have today. And something that we found is that relationships were the greatest cause of stress outside of the workplace up until recently. And off the back of surveying over 2,000 people, looking at hundreds of thousands of data points within there, financial pressure is now the largest cause of stress outside the workplace, and something that we found it's the highest increasing cause of stress outside the workplace from a percentage angle as well. So it seems like it's trending upwards, and that's no surprise from what we're seeing within the media and published at the moment. And when we look at what's keeping our employees awake at night, financial stress is one of those things. Now, individuals that reported their sleep quality is terrible, almost 50% of those is correlating with financial stress and poor financial well-being. And when we're looking at it from a business angle, because there will be some businesses that are saying, I don't know if this is a business challenge, 15% of these people are reporting that it's impacting directly their productivity, which is having a huge influence upon the bottom line within our organizations. Now, if we also correlate it with mental health, and we know it's so important to have a joined up cohesive wellbeing strategy, there's an increased risk of individuals experiencing clinical symptoms of anxiety or depression, again, if they're experiencing financial stress. And this is the perfect example of that, and the perfect storm we're going to talk through as to why this is occurring. And it's a bi-directional relationship as well, and we'll explain a little bit more about that shortly too. Now, when we get through to the more severe end of the spectrum when it comes to mental health and suicidal ideation and crisis, individuals are twice as likely to have suicidal ideation within our organizations if they are, again, experiencing financial stress or financial pressure. So almost 14% of people are experiencing suicidal ideation that are also experiencing financial stress, and that's compared to 6% not experiencing financial stress and pressure. And when we look at the demographics, and something we're going to dive really deep into, is that female employees are stating that they are more likely to experience financial stress than male employees. And not only that, younger employees are struggling when it comes to financial stress and pressure. And this should really then form a key part of our wellbeing strategy, of which we're going to go through on today's session. So hopefully that sets the scene to you off the back of the wellbeing report. And what I'd love to open up is with a question to yourself, Gethin, if that's okay, around what's the responsibility for organisations to begin with when it comes to financial wellbeing?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question. So if I go back to when I first started talking to employers about financial education, financial wellbeing in the workplace, we formed a partnership 10 years ago with Barclays when they released their research, which was called The Last Taboo of the Workplace. Probably the first ever big piece of research about financial wellbeing at work. And we worked with Barclays very closely to create that and built some products for them on the back of that research. And at that time, there was very much this employers saying, this is not my problem. I'm not getting involved in people's finances. That's outside of work. This is not for me to deal with. And for lots of employers that I consult with, even just before the pandemic, that was still an attitude more broadly around well-being, which is, you know, you come to work, you get paid at the end of the relationship. What happens outside of work is yours. And where the more progressive organizations were kind of getting to grips with the fact that actually we were forcing work and home to become blurred. You know, we definitely did that. We physically and logistically did that during the pandemic. We made people take work home. And so I think we're now in this place where probably more than ever, employers are openly admitting that they have a responsibility over the well-being of their people. I think that is compounded by the fact that in most state and government support around the world, it's just not where it needs to be when it comes to financial well-being. It's not where it needs to be when it comes to mental health. So both those areas of well-being are massively underfunded in almost every country right across the world. And so actually for most employees, it's, well, where do I go to get help? If I'm worried about money, if I'm concerned, if you go on to Google now and you kind of type, I'm worried about debt, and you see the results that come up, there are a lot of companies trying to sell you debt solutions like IVAs and things like that. And so Google has become such a big place, that's hard to navigate to find the right help.
Yeah.
And what we've really got in the UK, I think, is organizations like Step Change, the debt charity, and Money Helper, which used to be the money advice service. And they're great tools, there's some great resources, but you know, I don't think they're where they need to be. And so what happens now is, I think we're at a point where if I was talking to an employer and they said, I don't think this is my responsibility to solve, my response would be, it doesn't really matter what you think, because it's affecting your workforce, whether you believe it's your responsibility or not. And so I think we're now primed for more employers to accept that, well, if the government should be doing this, if they should be taught in schools, if banks should be doing it, whoever you think should be doing it is not doing it. So that's falling very firmly on the shoulders of employers. And actually, when you look at trust around the world, the Edelman Trust Barometer for the last 6 years or so, you can see some of the least trusted industries and institutions in the world are financial services. And the most trusted is now the employer in the lives of 72% people globally. So they trust their employer more than they trust their bank and their building society and most tech providers. So actually that all kind of comes together to say, well, actually probably this should happen in the workplace. And if you look back over 20 to 30 years worth of benefit designs, employee benefit designs, most benefit schemes 30 years ago were designed around well-being, and it's no different to how they're designed today. So we've actually been talking about this stuff, like pensions are probably the most prominent example, for 50 years in the workplace. If you're in America, since 1940s, health insurance is tied to work. So it feels like new thinking that well-being should be tied to our jobs, but actually it's been around for a long time. And I think it's just taken a while for people to get to grips with the idea of the responsibility they have.
Yeah, I think that's something that's a really powerful message, Geth. And I've heard some organisations say to me, if we're going to look at financial well-being, does that just mean that we're going to have to pay people more? What are your thoughts on that, Tari? Because I know education's a really big piece that you talk about consistently.
I think it's a mix of a few things. For me, when I'm speaking to clients at the moment, and a lot of organizations are being pushed into a corner, if we're being honest, by their workforce, because they are just struggling in light of this crisis. A lot of them are having to make some of these hard decisions. And I have clients who 3 months ago gave pay rises. But that's when inflation was, what, less than it is now by three decimal points. I think I forget exactly what the numbers were then. But my advice then will probably be my advice today, which would be, I think we need to look ahead of the curve, and we are just at the beginning of this crisis. And even the Bank of England has predicted that some of this inflation, we don't know when it's going to stabilize, and we don't know exactly what number it's going to stop at. Yeah. So giving pay rises right here and now may not be sustainable, because you're creating an expectation of things are going to get hard, we get another pay rise, things are going to get hard, and we get another pay rise. And which is understandable from a very short term perspective. But when you look at it in the long run, that's affecting the business working capital extensively, because that's a huge investment that you're making. And that means that in the next 6 months or 9 months, if you're an organization operating on this basis, that working capital is going to diminish extensively, and you're going to have to find yourself making other more difficult decisions, which will now be around the lines and conversations of redundancies. And no one wants to have those conversations. So I think there is an onus for businesses to review their existing benefits offering more than them actually giving pay rises. That's my personal advice, and I'm sure Gethin and Samuel may be able to add into that. But for me right now, what is most sustainable is, let's educate people to do better with what they have. Let's review what we're providing in this spectrum of well-being, especially the benefits offering. There's so many great ones out there, and I know, and I've come across some of the benefits that are around, and there's so many new entrants in the market that are making them very cost effective. Is it travel discounts? Is it, you know, grocery discounts? Those sort of discounts that are, those sort of expenses that are affecting the everyday individual. If we can cap them into some form of benefit that we can provide the individuals, then we are making a little bit of a breathing room in those stressed finances. So in a roundabout way, for me, the salary increases or the cost of living bonuses ad hoc that are being dished out at the moment, great as they are, I just don't think they're sustainable in the way for us to go.
And I think that's going to be a really key conversation at boardroom level. And the way that that's communicated is going to be essential, and would love to explore that plus the education piece a little bit more over the next 40 minutes or so. But before we do go on to that, Samuel, would love to get your thoughts. I know you're a living wage employer, and that's something that is really important, to be able to pay people the right amount, especially at the lower levels of the organisation. But also in an era of mass information, Gethin's already mentioned Google and Google search, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So how important is it to have that trusted and tailored advice from the employer or from our services?
It's absolutely crucial. Yeah, absolutely. Because there's lots and lots of information out there, like, you know, searching for this stuff, there's no shortage of it, but you're right, there's an awful lot of misinformation. So, and I think it was touched upon a little bit earlier about the lack of trust there is in financial services in general. And if we are going to tackle this education piece and ultimately, you know, help people understand the choices they're going to have to make in the coming months and years, then we've got to tackle that situation. But then, well, how do we provide something that is impartial, where there's no hidden agenda? Because, as you quite rightly say, if you Google, hey, I need help with debt, there's going to be a lot of different companies with a lot of different business models, some of them quite nefarious, trying to attract your business and make money out of ultimately your suffering, not to put, you know, too fine a point on it. And so that's a really big issue. And I think in general, what we're kind of seeing at the moment is businesses are falling into one of two camps, I think, at the moment. Either, in some respects, their hands are tied, and because not every business can provide a 10% pay rise to their staff right now. It's just not achievable, especially with the sort of spectre of a recession on the horizon. Or a business is committing to provide a pay rise, and that is a huge investment, regardless of the size of your organization. And then the question becomes, well, how can we protect that investment? How can we provide, you know, our workers, our staff with something that is going to help them, you know, make the most of that support that we're trying to provide? And it comes back to that education piece again, which is missing. You know, we come out of school and we understand trigonometry, or maybe some of us do. I don't necessarily understand it, but we don't understand how a mortgage works. That's kind of basic life skills, and it's a piece of the puzzle that's really significantly missing. And maybe that comes back again to that piece of, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it an employer? Is it the government? Well, in a way, it's everyone really. We have individual responsibility, but also there are responsibilities that are shared amongst us as a society so that we can help look after each other and improve things. So if we can deal with the education problem and we can provide support that is impartial and independent and trusted, then we're going to be doing something really positive and we're going to help people weather this situation that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and I think, again, so many points to take away within there, Samuel. And one of the big themes was communication. And you mentioned the Endelman's Trust Barometer previously, Gethin. The employers are now the most trusted source of information going to employees, which I find that information absolutely fascinating going forwards. What are the best communication styles when it comes to practical advice from organisations? Because we're bombarded with email communications on a daily basis. How would you encourage organisations and people today to communicate to their employees going forwards?
I think so trust underpins well-being, whatever pillar of well-being we're talking about. I think if we can't create conditions where an employee is able to tell their truth, that trust is needed for them to be able to do that, we're not going to be able to materially affect that person's life in a positive way. I think what we started to learn throughout the pandemic was, if you look at some of the data from the UK at the start of the pandemic, by the time the first lockdown came in, 2/3 of employers in the UK were saying that employee engagement scores had gone up.
Yeah.
By the time the second lockdown, they went down. And I think the reason why they went up is because we started doing the things we always should have done. Yeah. We had CEOs getting on calls in front of people saying, I know you're struggling. I know it's difficult. We're all in this together. I'm here for you. We sent out email communications on a regular basis to help people. We obviously had organizations who are making more of the things they bought and went and bought new products like Champion Health, etc., to help their people. And then by the time we kind of got used to the pandemic, they stopped doing those things because it just became part of normal life for the next year and a half, whatever it was, and still is. And so I think that the lesson there is that regular kind of communication and that communicating with empathy was a really big lesson, I think, for employers. I think one of the big things we found is over the years is that, most people have some well-being stuff in their organization. So even if they haven't really bought many things, you'll probably have an app, and that might just be one department or one location using an app. You'll have something like an employee assistance program. As Terry said, you'll have, some benefits available to you. But all of the data pretty consistently says that less than 20% of managers know where to direct people to that support. And 80% of employees say, I don't know where this stuff is. So it's, because we've still struggling with the fact that well-being doesn't tend to be owned by one person or one department, and obviously it affects so many parts of the business, it's hard to find that stuff. So I think training managers and employees and signposting them to where support is available, I think is probably the number one thing I'm currently recommending to customers, because I do audits on customers who come to me and say, we don't really do much around financial well-being. I want to help with the cost of living crisis. And when we kind of spend some time with them, do some Socratic questioning, by the end of that hour, we find out that they probably have about 15 different ways that they support employee financial well-being, but didn't think about it in that way. And then also it's a case of, so how do we make sure that if somebody comes to a manager and says, I'm struggling, how can we arm them to have a conversation so that if money is that stressor, that they can effectively listen and empathize with that individual, but then also direct them to appropriate support. And on a very basic level, that might be, EAP can be used for debt advice. Lots of EAP providers can put you in touch with Citizens Advice or others who will have conversations. And you said you like real life examples. And so this is one from quite a while ago. So when I was 23, I was managing a group of 20 people in an admin center in a pensions department. And one day, one of my members of staff came in really upset, crying, kind of completely beside herself. And I kind of went to find out what was going on, took her into a room. And it turns out this girl hadn't paid her council tax for about 7 years. And the council had finally caught up with her and given her a court summons. And so she was devastated because she's about to go to court and she owed $7,000 or whatever the figure was. And my boss at the time said, just send her home to deal with it. She's not going to be any use to us today. And even at 23, and this is probably my real first dip in the water of well-being, I kind of felt like this wasn't the right way to deal with it. I was like, surely we can help her. And so I ended up getting on EAP, having never phoned them before, with her on a conference call phone in an office, where we just kind of said, look, this is happening. Like, is there any way you can help? They then got on the call to Citizens Advice with us. We had a conversation. Citizen Advice then joined us on a call with Cardiff County Council, and we had a conversation about putting a payment plan in place. So later that day, they terminated the court date and agreed a payment plan that she could afford. And she came, and I remember saying to her, take a 2-hour lunch break, just sit in the park, chill out, have a coffee, whatever, come back to work. She came back to work in a better place than when she arrived at work. She had the feeling that we helped her and solved that problem for her, took that stress away. And that seemed like that was a much, much better place for us to be in as an employer. And I'm happy to say that as long ago as that was, that girl is still working in the same department, in the same company 20 years later.
What a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing that, Gethin. I absolutely love hearing those stories come to life, because it's all well and good having the data. The data is very powerful, but combined with those stories and narratives, that's really powerful. Tari, one of the things Geth mentioned was around line management and training up line managers. And you're huge on education. Is that something that you would really encourage organisations to do in terms of signposting and in terms of having those conversations around financial well-being with their teams?
100%. I think people have always sort of isolated financial well-being as this big elephant in the room, but this thing that we shouldn't really talk about, when really it's the motivating drive for why we are all coming into the workplace. But we will put all these other initiatives, not because I'm negating the importance of things like mental well-being and physical well-being and social well-being, also important, but there's almost that we have perpetuated the stigma of not talking about it and the initiatives that are built around helping it in the workplace by just not addressing it from a senior management perspective. In the worry, and I think with most employers, is, oh, they're going to ask us for pay rises, etc. This used to be a few years back when we started. This is the initial feedback that you'd get when we're talking about financial well-being. Now, when it comes to financial education, we have to get the senior management involved in that conversation, so that people do then feel that they can come and ask for the support. Like Gethin's example is perfect, you know, and he didn't even get trained on how to support individuals in that instance, which is really disappointing. But this should be part of a management's role and management training, and just getting people to not only feel comfortable to come and get support, but also then being empathetic enough to know that there's something that we can do as employers to help people come out of this situation. So yes, 100%, we advocate training management and also creating, we call them financial well-being coaches around the business. So people that are really clued on as to the different benefits on offer that you have in the business that aid financial well-being. So we're not asking them to give guidance or advice, but we're at least asking them to be able to signpost on different matters. And part of that is doing a deep dive. And I think Gethin alluded to it earlier, where you speak to clients and understand, okay, what do you have in place at the moment that could contribute towards financial well-being? And some of it will be rewards and discounts. And these all contribute to, for example, budgeting. You know, if someone is struggling with budgeting and they just feel like they're spending way less than they earn, then being able to understand what they have in these discounts and rewards that are there with some of these initiatives will help them make some leeway. For example, when looking at practical examples, I think of, every time I'm speaking to organizations, I'm always like, I'm sure you have some form of benefits discount platform that you're using. Some of them give 4% off Tesco. Some of them give, I think, 6% off Sainsbury's. A lot of employees don't use them because they just don't know. And part of it is because we're not educating during induction. And part of it is also because management are not pushing people to use them. But can you imagine if your grocery bill a month is, what, £200 a month, and you leverage that 6% off? You've made a bit of a saving. It seems marginal, right? It seems marginal, but the cumulative amount in a year is money you can put away for something surely. And in the same vein, when we're talking about other initiatives, be it life insurance, etc., if we just educate people on this is what we have, And this is where it fits in when it comes to financial planning or financial education, rather. So if it's in your budgeting savings section, in your insurances in terms of how to protect yourself and your family, in your investing session, obviously we're talking about the pensions, etc. here, or if you've got an employee savings plan, that all counts to that education, because you're not only letting people know this is what we have, but you're then educating them on how they can use it so that they realize the full benefit of it. So yes, long way of answering your question, but yes, management definitely needs to be educated on how they can also speak and support people on this from an empathetic perspective as well. Cannot be condescending, especially in today's world where people are struggling. I think that education has to be delivered, and those conversations have to be delivered with a lot of empathy.
I think that's absolutely vital as well. And something that I've seen personally, and Sam would love to get your thoughts on this, is the dial switch around mental well-being across many organisations. I don't want to say every organisation, because many still have a way to go, and even those that are doing amazing things, it's still a journey of progression. But it seems like financial well-being has been a little bit behind that in terms of the conversation and the focus. Are you seeing the same? And are you seeing some of the similar the themes around training up line managers, around education, around awareness, around data, that a lot of organisations are now looking at with mental well-being, and the same's happening with financial well-being as well?
Yeah, it kind of feels like if we were to rewind a couple of years, the pandemic has hit, and there's a lot of education and awareness and discussion about mental health and burnout. It kind of feels like we're experiencing the same right now when it comes to financial health and financial well-being in the workplace. So more people are talking about it, which is a great thing, because it's something that historically, especially in sort of, our society, has been something that's frowned upon. You shouldn't talk about money. It's gauche. You shouldn't discuss these things. And so it can be very difficult to talk to colleagues or talk to friends or even talk to family members about this stuff. And so the more we can talk about it, the more we can open up this discussion, the more we can get that culture coming down from the top to normalize talking about this stuff, the more we can help people. Because otherwise it remains, I think, Terry, you refer to it as the elephant in the room. And it is that. It's something that is there. There's no escaping it, especially not now. It's affecting everyone. But nobody is really talking about it in an effective way. And one of the really scary things that, I've come across in our research at BIPIT is that 9 out of 10 people have never spoken to an expert about their finances. And if they're not able to talk to colleagues or talk to friends or family members about this stuff, then where do they turn? And I was certainly in that situation myself. I shared a little bit about how I had to deal with financial stress earlier in my life. And the reason it got so bad was because I didn't want to worry my family, and I was too embarrassed to talk to my friends about it, and I didn't really know where to turn. So I just kind of, white knuckled my way through it. And that's a really big issue that we've got to address.
And it seems like that's something that's progressing, like the mental health conversation. And what I want to do is deliver a message of hope, as well as this is a difficult conversation to have. But this is something that organisations are progressing with at the moment, and it's amazing to see those inroads. Now, one of the things that we'd love to do is dive into the demographics of the data that we presented earlier on. And the first area that I'd love to start with is around age groups and age ranges. That we know that 25 to 34-year-olds are twice as likely to be experiencing financial stress compared to 45 to 54-year-olds. Geth, could you just shine a light on why that could be, and also what we can do within our organisations to support that specific demographic?
Yeah, so I think people under the age of 40, adults under the age of 40 at the moment, tend to make up in most organisations around 40 to 50% of the workforce. So it's in many cases kind of the bulk of the workforce are in that age bracket. And if we think back to the 2008 recession, the people who are affected worst by that recession were young people and women. And I know we're going to come on to women separately, so I'll kind of leave that point for the moment. But, they are certainly two groups that get screwed over by every single crisis that seems to affect us at the moment. And so the 2008 financial crisis unfairly, if you like, and adversely affected the finances of those under the age of 40. And they then bore the brunt of the pandemic. So you were more likely to lose your job if you were under the age of 40. You were more likely to lose your job if you're a woman. So actually 78% of women who lost, 78% of people who lost their jobs during the pandemic were women. So massively adversely affected women in the workforce. And so what all that kind of compounds, so you had kind of this housing crisis following 2008. By the time those people really kind of got on top of their finances, they were adversely affected by the next crisis, and they are being adversely affected by this crisis. And all of that has led to the under 40s now officially being the unluckiest generation since records began, economically speaking. And so if you look at graphs about how we accumulate wealth as kind of individuals and families and households, what tends to happen is the next generation will always do better than the one that went before. So our parents would have done better than our grandparents in most families, and we should do better than our parents. But for anyone under the age of 40, that graph has been going up and up and up since about 1880. And in 2010 to 2020, it started dropping. So for the first time in like 100 odd years, people are no longer doing better than their parents are. And I've got friends who earn very good salaries, who earn an individual who earns more than both their parents ever did at the height of their careers, yet he could not afford to buy their house at the moment. So, and I take my mum and dad are living in a house that's worth more than the house that I live in. And my mum only ever worked part-time in a shop, and my dad was a prison officer. So they've accumulated a significant amount of wealth, really, based on the jobs that they did in their lives. And that's a pretty familiar story. I think in this country, you've got 1 in 5 people over the age of 55 are technically millionaires by the assets they've acquired. And that is a very different picture to what it's like for young people. And so I think when we focus on young people at the moment, we are looking at a unique set of challenges that have hit them in the last 20 years or so that don't affect others. So I was the first year of university where we didn't get grants and we had to take out a student loan. So for the first 10 years of my working life, I had a student loan to pay, whereas those who went before me didn't have that to pay. It was harder to get on the property ladder over the last 20 years. And so all this stuff is compounding. And so I think it's really important that we think about that, because historically financial well-being at work tended to focus really on retirement and pensions and those people who are in later life, rather than actually how do we help people solve some of the problems as soon as they start working with us. Yeah. And understanding that as soon as somebody starts working with us, even if they're straight out of college or university, they're already coming to us under financial strain. In this country, there is the average age of a 16-year-old with a credit card, it's got a balance of about £5,000. And it's insane that that kind of stuff should be happening. And there are even reports now about, during this cost of living crisis, that you've got children under the age of 15 who are reporting mental health conditions because they're worried about their parents' finances. And that shouldn't be a situation that we're in.
And what can we do as employers going forwards to support that demographic? Because everything you mentioned, I completely agree with. But employers are in quite tricky positions when it comes to then supporting that demographic, especially as senior leadership teams, generally speaking, are over 40 or are over 35. So what can they do to support the 25 to 34-year-old bracket?
So I think there's a couple of things we've talked about already today. I completely agree with Samuel and Tari. Education, I think, comes first. I think we have data from about 126 different global studies that prove that when people get financial education, they make better financial decisions. They're better off for it. We have data from the Bank of England that shows when people are more financially illiterate, that correlates with people making not just poorer decisions, but actually taking on higher debts. So kind of forearmed is forewarned type thing, giving people information to make the best decisions. And I think even in the workplace at the moment, there are lots of different products that are emerging into the market. You have things like payroll lending, you have early wage access, and we're putting these tools in front of our people without giving them any framework of understanding them. The data tells us that most people in the UK can't tell you what APR stands for, but can tell you what LOL stands for. So people don't understand APR. People don't understand how lending money. Some of the stuff that's come out about Klarna and these buy now, pay later schemes recently has found something in the region of about 75% of people who have a buy now, pay later loan don't actually understand how APR works, according to a couple of different surveys. And so I think we've got to make sure that if we are going to put those tools in front of people, like early wage access, payroll lending, that kind of stuff, that has to come with a wraparound of education first. We have to make sure that if somebody's going to lend money, they're completely fully informed as to how that's going to affect any decisions that they make. And another really good real life example of that, which was in the news last week, an NHS nurse decided to free up money now to face the cost of living crisis by reducing her pension contributions. And I expect by the end of this year, that's going to be pretty common. We'll see average employee pension contributions probably drop a little bit, because it's an easy way to free up £100 a month or whatever the figure is. For this individual in the NHS, they actually decided to completely opt out of the pension. So they didn't just reduce their contributions, they actually completely took them all out. That woman, obviously, unbeknownst to her, died a few weeks later. And as a result of that, she didn't have life insurance because that was tied to her company pension scheme. And so actually she now has 2 orphan children that have got no money to pay for her debts or expenses or funeral, or to kind of set them up at all. And so I think that's pretty significant, right? I'm not entirely convinced that most employees would understand, by the way, if you take this money out, not only is this the impact in retirement of you making that decision, which, £100 now could set their retirement plans back by a decade without them really understanding that, but also, some of those benefits that might disappear with that. So that awareness and education, I don't think we can stress enough, and hopefully Terry and Samuel would agree that that's got to be the kind of first thing that everyone needs to do. Whenever I mention this, I always get it. I think we've got it in the comments here. Someone always tells me that it needs to be done in schools. I don't disagree with that at all. However, if you look at some of the data, I did my pensions qualifications at 20. Most of those are completely irrelevant now because so much has changed. So teaching stuff in school, by the time somebody has to actually then make a financial decision like a mortgage or a pension, etc., some of that stuff is outdated. But generally speaking, it's not happening in schools. We have a government that doesn't care about teaching this stuff in schools and has been very clear on that, I think, regardless of your political persuasions. There is a requirement in this country, and has been since about, I think, 2011 or 2014, to teach financial education in school as part of PHE lessons. But that requirement is only 1 hour, and about 70% of teachers say they just don't have enough time to teach that. Yeah. So it's not being taught in school. So we might as well finish, you vote for whatever government's going to put that back in schools. But for the time being, and certainly for the rest of this crisis, that's not going to be taught in schools. And I think that's going to continue to be a problem, but one that employers can certainly help with.
I think throughout the last few minutes, Gethin, so much to take away for us, and I'm sure everyone would agree with that. What I'd love to do now is explore the disparities between female and male when it comes to financial well-being. And from the data that we found at Champion Health, again, the females are 33% more likely to be experiencing financial stress and pressure than males are. And Tari, would love to come to you on that to get your thoughts as to, again, why that's the case, and also what we can do about it going forwards.
I think at the moment, what we're seeing, I mean, the gender pay gap has existed before time, and I know there are massive efforts to improve that, but that's still there. And you do find that women typically are the ones that end up working part-time jobs or lower earning jobs of that spectrum. So when there's redundancies or where furloughing happened, like Gethin alluded to, women were the ones that were either put on furlough, which impacted their income. And women are also then the ones that also cover household expenses, i.e. food, shopping, i.e. Cleaning products. And both are typically heavily impacted by inflation and increasing prices. So you do find that, especially in my situation, my grocery bill has almost doubled in the last 6 months. And that's affecting my income alone before, anything my husband puts into the equation. So we are then really much hit by this cost of living crisis more. And if you then factor in things like nursery fees, I think I was discussing with you, Harry, that, this is my first year having to deal with nursery fees. I didn't know these little monsters existed in the first place. I didn't know they were this expensive. Otherwise, I would have maybe used contraception. But here we are. And we laugh about it now, but for to put your child in nursery maybe 3 days a week is about 800 and something pounds. That's 3 full days. And that's someone's mortgage. That's someone's income in some instances. And typically when that becomes too much, again, the woman ends up having to make that decision to either work part-time to accommodate, to make things balance, because I can only imagine what putting a child in nursery 5 days a week becomes. Yeah. Or the women just decides not to work at all. And when they make that decision, again, pension contributions are impacted. So then there's a long-term consequence to that. Even going on maternity leave, pension contributions are also impacted. So you have to look at how this affects women holistically and then start putting initiatives to support them. And what those initiatives look like, we've run through so many different ideas internally, just trying to advise different clients.
Yeah.
But I know there's some nurseries that are providing employee packages so that the employer can also subsidize some of these nursery fees, for example. Also, just making sure that you've got these rewards platforms that I was speaking of, the 6% of Sainsbury's. It seems marginal, but it makes a huge deal. Saving £20 a month because you've used that discount, that's £20 that can go to more food shopping, or you can go towards even buying nappies, which you buy loads of, by the way, with these little human beings. I'm hoping this is a great contraception call for people as well whilst we're talking about it. But, you know, in a nutshell, there's so much more that we have to do to support women in this space because of that. And part of it is trying to bridge that gender pay gap. And I know it's always a good thing to keep throwing out there and saying, and it's not as easy and as straightforward, but organizations just really need to push more on this agenda. Because when we have a little bit more equality in this space, then, you know, that pinch may not be as heavy felt as we're feeling it right now, especially within the female population.
Yeah, I think that's again a really powerful message, and I know that there are many people that attend these sessions at board level and C-suites within their organisations, and I think a lot of what we're hopefully sharing is a lot of thought leadership around this topic, but it's going to take the organisation to tackle the gender pay gap when it comes to a lot of this, and to have difficult conversations, to listen to employees, and then to implement feedback where possible going forwards. Sam, I've just been reading a lot of the comments, and thank you all for your comments and some fascinating questions. I'm hoping to get through to a few of them now. And we've had some comments sent to me personally or sent to everyone around people being quite fearful of coming to the office because of transport costs. And then we've had other people saying, actually, people want to come to the office because of heating costs and everything else that's going on with energy bills. Is it a bit of a damned if we do, damned if we don't? How do we accommodate everyone within our organisations? And again, does it just come down to communication and listening?
I think it does come down to communication and listening, but also the education and support piece that we've been coming back to time and again, because everyone is unique. Everyone has a unique situation, especially when it comes to their finances. So there's no, one size fits all answer for how to deal with what's going on right now, and no one size fits all answer about whether people should come to the office or stay at home and how it's going to fit their financial situation. And I think if there is going to be some kind of support provided, it needs to take into account of that. It needs to take into account the fact that everyone is individual. We're dealing with people here, and it's not just, trying to, shoehorn something in and tick a box. And because look, when we're helping people through BIPIT's coaching, we're supporting people who are recent graduates, and they're really struggling to budget, and some of them are struggling to pay off credit cards and overdrafts. They want to build better habits, they want to build savings, they want to build security, they want to avoid the pitfalls, and they also want to enjoy their lives right now, which is something that we can sometimes exclude from this conversation, because we've got to have that balance. And then, you've got people in the midst of their career and they're experiencing different life events. There are people who want to start a family. There are people who are trying desperately to get on the property ladder, which, as Gethin alluded to earlier, is harder than ever. The goalposts have moved, right? It's no longer, from my parents' generation, 3 times salary to buy a sort of average priced house. It's now 10 times salary to buy an average priced house. So we're trying to support those people as well. And then, of course, we've got people in the workforce who are approaching retirement. And as we touched upon earlier, people are having to make very difficult decisions right now, which they might not 100% understand. And that really, emotive story that Gethin shared, which is, really, really difficult to hear, frankly. That's not an isolated case. Through our coaches, through our platform at the moment, lots of people are asking, hey, should I be pausing my pension contributions? People don't understand the choices that they're having to make. So we have to fix that if we're going to, make a difference to what's going on right now.
And a quick follow-up question, if you don't mind, Sam, on that as well, is that from my experience and from the people that I speak to inside and outside of the workplace, financial education and coaching has seemed to be quite elitist for a long time. It's traditionally around how do we make the wealthy wealthier. Is that something that you're looking to make financial well-being as inclusive and accessible to absolutely everyone, no matter what salary they're on?
Yeah, that has to be where we're all going with this situation. I mentioned a statistic earlier that the vast majority of us have never had the opportunity to speak to an expert, because the model for that in financial services has been, well, it's only worth talking to people who are wealthy already because we can generate lots of revenue out of that. And I think what's happening now with this wave of support through the workplace is that we can get support into the hands of ordinary workers completely free of charge. We've got the technology to make this support efficient enough to make it affordable, that we can get it into the hands of every single person, no matter what your background is, no matter what your bank balance is. Everyone can have access to this kind of support. And if we can do that, then one, we're dealing with this elephant in the room, hopefully. But the support that gets provided, it has to be impartial, it has to be independent. There are too many things going on, and it was touched upon earlier, early wage access, payroll lending, which can either just kick the can down the road of the problem or actually exasperate an existing problem. So we have to be very, very careful about how these things are administered, make sure that the support that's provided, does what it should do, which is provide everyone with a safe space to talk about money. Because as we've touched upon a few times during the session, it is an elephant in the room. It's really hard to talk about this stuff with even friends and family members. So if we can do that confidential piece, and if we can do that education piece, then we should be able to provide people with the support they need, regardless of what their situation is.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message. And we've had a few questions earlier on that I'd like to come back to. And one of them that I'll answer personally is, do you think increased childcare costs will lead to an increase in workplace absences? Absolutely. I think it will. Now, speaking to a group head of wellbeing at a global organization and one of the best thought leaders in the space from who I've spoken to, and there was a spike in absence one Friday of every month. And one of the main reasons was because they couldn't afford to actually travel into the workplace, whether it's a call center, a specific department, to afford the fuel bill, because they hadn't been paid until the next day. And stuff like that really brings home that actually there's no effects without side effects. The rise in fuel prices are going to have knock-on effects elsewhere, and one of those areas may be absenteeism. And the more aware that we can be that increased costs of childcare will lead to increased levels of absence, and we can have that honest and open conversation with our employees, and our managers are trained, again, going back to that theme, I think that's really important. We've also had a question, Geth, on how do you know if you're being underpaid compared to your male equivalent within an organisation? And this is a tricky question to answer, but how would you take that?
Yeah, so depending on the size of your organisation, you could probably find out, because they should be publishing some of the gender pay gap stuff online, so you should be able to find that out. I mean, it's very, very difficult. I think there's no general consensus at the moment, I don't think, which is what's the right way to go about this. I've seen experiments where organisations have made everyone's pay commonly known to everybody. There was a Channel 4 documentary in the UK a couple of years ago where a company called Pimlico Plumbers did that, where they put a big board up in the office and told everybody what their salaries were. And after some initial problems, shall we say, with people realising how overpaid some were compared to others, it actually resulted in some senior leaders taking a pay cut in order to be able to give a pay rise to people lower down the kind of hierarchy. So I think at the moment it's very difficult. I mean, I would say to anyone, if you're not happy with the workplace, if you're not happy with work, if you don't think you're being treated right, if you don't think you're being paid right, leave, because there are people who will go and look after you who will pay you adequately. So if you suspect you're not getting paid as much as your male or female counterparts, I would try and constructively raise that, but I think the reality is you should probably try and move elsewhere. I think since gender pay reporting has come in, only recently have they shown any kind of improvement, but it's still nowhere near where it needs to be. But I would seek out your organisation online. You should be able to search for it on certain websites and find out what that pay gap is in your organisation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message, Geth. So thank you for sharing that. So we're coming closer to the end of today's session, and I've seen a lot of things around morale of employees and how to keep morale up over a period of time. And I think this is very much just to start from what we're reading. And unfortunately, the media does like to blow up these things and not necessarily always provide practical actions for us to follow as well. But it does feel very much like the start of what could be a tricky period with our finances going forward. So what I'd love to do is just go around each one of you to be able to get the one thing that you really encourage organizations to do to be able to empower employees to take control and to take control of their finances going forwards and to keep morale high. Tari, are you okay to kick us off there?
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me, but sure. I think my 3 things, for me, personalization and conversation is very important. So the first thing is ask people what they need and what they want right now. So surveying, and I know we are probably over surveyed out, but there's really benefits in really understanding how people feel during this cost of living crisis and where they need that support, because then that's going to help you formulate something that's more relevant and specific to that need. The other part, which I think we've all alluded to, is education. For me, education is a great preventative measure. And it should hopefully help people to thrive amidst the crisis, and or even sustain themselves well enough so that at the end of the crisis, because every crisis comes to an end, they will come out of it thriving, which I think everyone is looking for. And the third thing that I would probably say is review your existing benefits, get advice, speak to advisors or speak to organizations in this space that help in reviewing some of these benefits, so that you make sure that you've got benefits in place that are also relevant to the current socioeconomic issues that we're facing. The benefits of all that we may have that just may not work. I know a lot of organizations we have cycle to work, but in the world of hybrid working, is cycle to work really relevant right now? I don't know, but it's just up to us now to really review that as organizations, to think, okay, some of these things that we had 5 years ago probably don't fit the workspace narrative of today. So can we just review that to make sure that they work, and partner with someone who can help you in that space? I know there are loads of organizations that can help you with this.
Thank you, Tari. And Sam, would love to get your concluding thoughts on what we can do. If there's one thing that organizations can do off the back of today, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back to the education piece as well. Look, I think everyone, no exceptions, can benefit from more education, more support, more guidance, more coaching when it comes to our financial lives. And the research is really clear on it. If you can give people expert support, simply by making more of the right decisions at the right time, the effects are huge. The effects are up to £50,000 better off over 10 years, simply by knowing what to do and when to do it. So, if you're an organization and you're sort of weighing up, okay, should we be providing a pay rise? You should probably also be thinking about, should we be providing more education for our employees so they can make the most of their salary and they can achieve their goals in life? Because look, we've all got hopes and dreams, and pretty much every one of those hopes and dreams is rooted in what we can do with our finances. If we're managing our finances on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, we're going to be able to achieve those things in the future. So that education piece has to be there. But I would just add a sort of little coda to that, and that is it's crucially important, at least from what I've experienced, that support is provided in some kind of confidential way. And there are lots of different ways to do this. It can just be through signposting, it can be through an EAP, it can be through a financial wellbeing and coaching platform, whatever it is. Providing that safe, confidential space, somewhere where employees can feel like, okay, I can go there and this is private, because there is so much stigma surrounding these issues. If we can do the education, and if we can do it in a confidential way, in a trusted way, then hopefully we're going to be doing an awful lot of heavy lifting for this problem.
Thank you, Sam. And I'm sure there are some bellies rumbling in the UK at the moment, or maybe even abroad as well. as it might be dinner time or breakfast time in certain areas. Geth, would love to just get your concluding thoughts as well as to the one thing you'd encourage organisations to do.
Yeah, so very quickly, I think there's two things. Make sure you're not the cause of any additional stress. So Jamie's mentioned it in the chat. Pay people accurately on time. This is not the time to be making payroll mistakes. People can't survive without their pay for a couple of days, things like that. So make sure you're not causing the problem. Make sure you're not unnecessarily making sure employees have to pay for their own train fare and claim it back. Try and pay for that stuff up front. And I think the second thing is, forget the fact that this is about money. It's a stressor that is affecting your employees. So treat it in the same way that if somebody was stressed about their relationships or a divorce or whatever it might be going on outside work, have the support in place so they can come to you and talk to you, that you can direct them to experts, that you can support this stressor that's affecting their mental health. And I think for those organizations that do not have a budget to spend on this stuff, those two things together, I think, will go quite far.
Thank you, Geth, and a huge thank you to the three of you for today. I have been frantically making some notes as well. I'm going to rewatch the recording, and I've just seen Katie's comment as well of this has been excellent. I wish I had invited our HR department too. So just to note that everyone will get the recording within the next 24 hours. I found it really insightful from my end, so thank you for sharing your knowledge going forwards. And there are two actions that I'd love you to do off the back of today. The first one is to check out Gethin's latest book. It's absolutely wonderful, and Geth, I'm sure you could share a little bit more around that with the audience at some point. So Geth, if you could pop a link to the book in the chat, that would be fantastic. And the second thing is for any feedback that you've got off today's session, the good, the bad and the ugly, what you found really useful and what you would like going forwards. I read every single piece of feedback that you give. And so the more feedback we can get, the more people we can help in your position going forward. So a big thank you to you for joining, for taking this topic so seriously going forwards. And we look forward to seeing you on the next live session. Take care all. See you soon.